Before I tell you anything about this one, I want to put a deal in front of you, and I want you to answer it right now, before you know a single fact. A man you cannot beat, who has more money than your whole county, tells you this. Leave tonight. Take the highway. Don't stop. Don't come back. Do that, and your 12-year-old daughter grows up. Refuse, and she doesn't. That's the whole offer. You have about 4 seconds. Go. Most people say the same thing. Most people say they'd stay and fight, because that's what you're supposed to say out loud. And most people would be wrong, and not because they lack courage. They'd be wrong because they think that question is about courage. It isn't. It's about time. Whoever forces the clock owns the fight, and a man who gives you 4 seconds to answer has already told you the only thing about him that matters, which is that he is terrified of what you might do with 4 days. I'm Nathan, and the man in this story took a version of that deal, in front of witnesses, with his boots getting ashed on. He left. The town watched him leave. His own daughter thought he'd left. And what he actually did with the 11 days after that is one of the most patient, coldest, most precisely built pieces of work I've ever put in front of you, and almost none of it involved his hands. The thing you're going to want to hold on to, all the way through, is a number. 406. I'll tell you what it counts when he tells his daughter. Cordero County, Texas is 1,900 square miles of creosote and caliche, with about 2,300 people scattered across it. And if you drew every road in it on a napkin, you'd still have most of the napkin left. The county seat is a town called Vado Seco, which means dry ford, and it was named by people with a sense of humor, because the ford has water in it maybe 11 days a year, and the rest of the time it's a road with a story about a river. Jubal Kearsey had lived there twice, once from birth until he was 18, and once from 38 until the part of his life I'm about to tell you. In between, there were 20 years he did not describe to anybody, including his wife, and the way he did not describe them was so smooth and so friendly that people in Vado Seco genuinely believed they knew what he'd done. If you'd asked at the feed store, you'd have been told Jubal did something with trucks. Motor pool, probably. Fix things. 20 years fixing trucks, and now he fixed water instead, which made a nice tidy shape for people to hold, and he never once corrected it. He was 44. He was built like a fence post with shoulders. He wore the same 4 shirts, and he ran an outfit called Kearsey Water and Pump out of a metal building on the Bolson Highway with his name on it in letters somebody else had painted in 1974 for his grandfather. He drilled water wells. That was the whole business. A rig, a support truck, a mud pump, 2 men when he could afford 2 men, and about 900 feet of drill pipe stacked in a rack that sang when the wind came off the flats. Here's the part everybody in Vado Seco knew, and nobody in Vado Seco thought about. In a county where the surface is a lie and everything that matters is underneath it, Jubal Kearsey was the only living person who had been under all of it. In 15 years, he had drilled, deepened, cleaned, cased, plugged, or logged 406 holes in Cordero County. 406. Every one of them was written down. That was the other thing about him. He kept a tally book. It was a habit that had been beaten into him somewhere in those 20 years he didn't talk about, and it had followed him home and turned into something that looked, from the outside, like a boring man's boring hobby. A green hardbound logbook for each year, 15 of them on a shelf above the desk, and inside, for every hole, in the same square hand, date, landowner, section, block, survey, latitude and longitude to 5 decimals, total depth, casing size and depth, static water level, yield in gallons per minute, the formations he'd come through and at what footage, and a small hand-drawn map of the wellhead with distances to 2 fixed objects, because gates move and fences fall down and a windmill can be sold for scrap, but a section corner and a rock outcrop stay where they are. He also filed the state paperwork, every time on time, because that was the law and because he was constitutionally incapable of not doing it. Every one of those 406 holes had a driller's report sitting in a state database in Austin with a date stamp on it. 15 years of them. Jubal thought of that database the way you think of the drawer where you put the warranty papers. It was just where the copies went. He had a daughter named Odalie, and she was 12, and she was, in a way that made him quietly proud and occasionally uneasy, exactly like him. She counted things. She had counted the stairs at her grandmother's house, and the fence posts between the cattle guard and the mailbox, and the number of times the courthouse clock was wrong in a month, and when she was 8, she had started drawing a map. It wasn't a school project. Nobody assigned it. She had gotten a roll of butcher paper from the cafe and taped 4 feet of it to the wall of her bedroom at her father's house, and she had drawn Cordero County on it, and every time she went anywhere she added what she'd seen. Not the roads. The roads were already there. She added the things that changed. A new gate, a cattle guard that got replaced, a house with the windows boarded, which ranch had which brand on the entrance, where the good Ocotillo was. She had a key in the corner with symbols she'd invented, and she updated it in pencil so she could erase. And by the time she was 12, there were about 1,100 marks on that map, and there was nothing else like it in the world. Jubal had never told her that what she was doing had a name, and that he had spent a significant part of his adult life doing it. He just bought her pencils. Odalie's mother was named Camila. The marriage had lasted 11 years, and it had ended the way most of them end out there, not with a bang, but with a slow accumulation of silence, and the 400 miles between Vado Seco and anything a person might want. Camila was 39, and she was the smartest person in most rooms she walked into, and she had spent 20 years in rooms too small for that to matter. She had grown up in Ciudad Bolson across the river, come over at 19, worked at the school district office, and married a man who was gone for 11 months of some years, and who, when he came home, was kind and steady and about as easy to know as a closed door. The divorce was 2 years old, and it had been, by the standards of that county, almost polite. Odalie was with her mother on weekdays, and with her father from Friday afternoon to Sunday evening, and both of them had held to it exactly, and if the whole thing had stayed there, it would have been an ordinary sad story about 2 decent people who ran out of things to say. 14 months before this story starts, Camila married a man named Ruben Sabinal. The town's opinion of that was mixed and mostly quiet. Sabinal had money, obviously. He had shown up in Cordero County 4 years earlier, bought the old Pruitt house on the hill above town, and put a wall around it, and then started buying ranch land in a way nobody could make sense of. He bought dry. That was the thing. He bought parcels with no water, no house, no road frontage, dirt so poor that the families holding it had been trying to unload it since the 80s, and he paid more than they were worth, and he paid cash, and he did it through a title company he owned in the strip mall by the courthouse. Vado Seco decided he was a fool with money. Vado Seco was so wrong about that it's almost funny. Jubal's opinion he kept to himself, which is what he did with all of them, and for 11 of those 14 months he did nothing at all except be perfectly civil at handoffs in the school parking lot and watch his daughter get a little quieter. The first thing that was actually wrong, he didn't recognize as wrong. It just made him stop the truck. It was a Tuesday in March, and he was running the Bolson Highway out to a job on the Tarleton Place, which is 41,000 acres of nothing on the riverside of the county. And he passed a turnoff he'd used 100 times, a 2-track that ran back to a windmill, and a stock tank on a parcel that had belonged to a family named Dela Cruz. And there was a gate on it, a new one, pipe and expanded metal, with a chain and a lock, and a sign that said no trespassing in 2 languages. And Jubal looked at that gate for a while, because there was no earthly reason for it. There were no cattle on that parcel. There hadn't been cattle on that parcel since 2011. There was nothing back there to steal but a windmill nobody had greased in a decade, and a hole in the ground he had personally drilled in 2009 and plugged in 2013 when it went dry. He wrote it in the tally book that night, not because it meant anything, because that's what he did with things that didn't fit. 9 days later he was on the Tarleton job pulling a pump, and he took a shortcut across the corner of another parcel, one that had gone to a company called Rio Bolson Land Holdings 2 years back, and he drove past a second capped well, his own. He'd set that cap himself. He stopped, and he got out, and he stood there in the wind and looked at it. You cap an abandoned well with a steel plate welded over the casing, or with a bolted cap, and the way Jubal did his was with 6 bolts. And the way Jubal did anything with 6 bolts was in a star pattern, 1 to 4 to 2 to 5 to 3 to 6, because that's how you seat a thing flat. And if you have spent your life around men who do it any other way, you will notice it forever. The cap on that well had been off and put back on, and whoever had put it back had gone around the circle in order, like they were tightening a jar lid, and two of the bolts were a quarter turn different from the rest, and the paint on the heads was scarred bright. He didn't touch it. He got back in the truck, and he drove to the job, and he pulled the pump, and he came home, and he wrote it down, with the date and the time and the coordinates and a small drawing of the bolt pattern. He did not know yet that he was looking at a $200 million problem. He just knew somebody had been in his hole. Ruben Sabinal had never in his life touched a kilogram of anything. He would have found the suggestion insulting. He was, in the most literal sense of a word people throw around loosely, a fixer, and what he fixed was paper. He was 47. He was from Monterey, and he had a law degree he'd finished, and a second one he hadn't, and he had come up not through violence, but through the far more useful skill of being the only person in a room full of dangerous men who understood how a county recorder's office works. That's the whole trick, and almost nobody in that business understands it. You can move a ton of anything across a border. Moving it is the easy problem, the loud problem, the problem for men with tattoos and short futures. The hard problem is the one nobody films. How do you own the ground it crosses? And how do you own it in a way that survives a court? Sabinal's answer was land, and specifically, worthless land. The stretch of Cordero County between the Tarleton Place and the De La Cruz section is about 40 miles of river frontage backed by ranch parcels that nobody wants. No water, no road, no reason. Over 4 years, through 11 shell entities and one title company, Ruben Sabinal had acquired 14 of those parcels, plus easements across 9 more, plus the water rights on all of them, which were worth nothing, which was exactly why they were cheap and nobody asked. What he had assembled, on paper, was a continuous private corridor from the river to a county road that connected to Interstate 10 without passing a single checkpoint, and every foot of it was legal, recorded, taxed, and title insured. The plaza he worked for was run by a man in Ciudad Bolson named Aurelio Casarin, who was 60 and who people called Doce, and who had made exactly one smart decision in his life, which was to listen to Ruben Sabinal in 2019 when Sabinal told him that the future was not tunnels. Sabinal's other innovation was the holes. You have a problem when you move product and money across a border in a corridor, which is that at some point in the chain, the thing has to sit. It has to sit somewhere for a day or a week while the next leg gets arranged, and a stash house has neighbors, and a warehouse has a lease, and a buried cache has a man with a shovel who knows where it is and who can be arrested. So what do? You use what's already there and already boring. Cordero County is perforated. There are hundreds of abandoned water wells out there, cased steel pipe going straight down anywhere from 60 to 1,100 feet, most of them capped, all of them on somebody's private dirt, all of them on a map nobody looks at. A cased dry hole is a vault. It's dry. It's a constant temperature. It doesn't show on thermal. You can't dig it up. A dog can't smell 40 feet of air. And if a helicopter flies over it, what it sees is a piece of pipe sticking out of the ground next to a dead windmill, the same as it sees 900 other places. You lower a canvas bag on aircraft cable to a hook set at 40 feet. You put the cap back on. That's it. That's the whole system. Sabinal had 14 of them running, and on any given week they held somewhere between $80 and $200 million of other people's product and cash, and in 4 years, he had never lost one. He was also, and this is the part the town missed entirely, a genuinely cruel man, in a way that had nothing to do with the business. There was a widow named Inés de la Cruz, 76, whose family had held that section since 1911, and who did not want to sell. Sabinal did not threaten her. He bought the note on her nephew's used car lot in Alpine, and then he bought the small ranch that adjoined hers, and put a fence across the 2-track that was her only practical access, which he was entitled to do. And then he came to her kitchen with a lawyer and a peach pie, and sat with her for 2 hours being lovely. And she signed, and he paid her 11% under what he'd offered the first time. And on the way out, he told her the pie was from a bakery in Marfa, and she should try it sometime. He told that story at dinner parties. He thought it was charming. Camila did not know what her husband did. I want to be careful about this, because it matters later, and because it's the thing that decides how you feel about her. And the honest answer is the uncomfortable one. She did not know, and she had worked at not knowing, and there's a point where those two are the same thing. She knew he had money that didn't match the businesses. She knew men came to the house at night and did not come inside. She knew that when she'd asked, once, early, he had answered so smoothly and at such length that she'd understood she was never going to get a second question in. And she knew that for the first time in her adult life she was not counting anything at the end of the month, and that her daughter had a room with a window seat, and that when she said out loud that she wanted to go back to school for the counseling degree, nobody said we'll see. What she got in exchange was a rule. Reuben's rule was that his wife's daughter was his daughter, and that the arrangement with the well driller was, in his word, provisional. Odalie started spending weekends at the house on the hill, under a provision of the custody agreement about holidays that Camila stretched twice, and then 3 times, and Jubal did not fight it, because he had been raised by a man who told him that a fight in front of a child is a thing the child keeps. In April, Reuben Sabinal came to the school. He was not on the pickup list. He didn't need to be. The front office knew who he was, and half of them had cousins on his payroll. He stood at the fence in a linen jacket in 94-degree heat, and he waited while Odalie came across the lot, and Jubal, who was parked exactly where he was supposed to be parked, watched a man he had never spoken to put his hand on the back of his daughter's neck and steer her toward a black Suburban. Jubal got out and walked over and said, evenly, that Friday was his. Sabinal turned around and looked at him with real interest, the way you'd look at a dog that had done something almost like talking, and he said, in perfect English with a smile on it, "Of course, my mistake," and he let go of her neck. And then he said, quieter, still smiling, "You should get that windmill on the Dela Cruz seen to. It's making a noise." Then he drove away, and Jubal stood in a school parking lot for about 10 seconds, understanding that a man had just told him, in code, that he knew Jubal had been out there looking. That night Odalie sat on the tailgate at the shop while he coiled a hose, and she said, in the flat voice she used when she'd been thinking about something for a while, "Dad, the trucks that go out the Bolson Highway at night, there's a pattern." He didn't stop coiling. "Is there? 2 together, always. Never 1, never 3. They go out between 11 and 1 and they come back before 4, and it's not every night. It's 4 or 5 nights apart, and it's more after it rains." She swung her heels against the tailgate. "It's on the map. I've been doing it since I was 10 because I thought it was cattle. It's not cattle. There's no cattle out there." Jubal set the hose down and asked, very carefully, whether she'd told anyone else about the map. "It's a map," Odalie said. "It's not interesting." He said okay. He said it was a good map. And then he went inside and sat down at the desk under the shelf with 15 green log books on it, and did not sleep. The confrontation happened on a Thursday, at the yard, at 6:40 in the evening, with the light going orange, and long the way it does out there. Jubal was rigging down. The Suburban came in through the gate that was always open and stopped crooked across the drive, the way people do when they want you to know they don't intend to be there long, and Reuben Sabinal got out of the passenger side, and a young man named Nico Almanza got out of the driver's side and stayed by the door with his hands loose. Sabinal walked over and looked at the rig for a moment, with what appeared to be genuine appreciation. "You know what I like about your business," he said. "It is the only business in this county that produces something out of nothing. Everything else here just moves things around." Jubal wound the last of the line onto the reel and said nothing. "I'm going to say this once, because I have found that saying things twice teaches people that the first time was not serious." Sabinal took a pack of cigarettes out of his jacket, tapped one out, lit it. "Leave this town tonight, not tomorrow. Tonight, go anywhere, or you have no idea what I'm going to do with your daughter." The wind moved the drill pipe in the rack, and it made the sound it makes. "She's my property now," Sabinal said, and he flicked the cigarette, and it hit the toe of Jubal's boot, and lay there burning. "I have thought about what happened next, more than any other 5 seconds in this story, because if you write it down, it looks like nothing." Jubal Kearsey looked at the cigarette on his boot, and he let out a small laugh. Not a big one, the kind of sound a man makes at a joke he's heard before. "Property," he said. That's funny. And then he told him, flatly, the way you'd read a serial number. 20 years. I did a job that had a lot of names, and none of them were true. Most of it was sitting. You sit on a man for 6 weeks, and you learn what time he wakes up, who he owes, which of his cousins hates him, where his money sleeps, and who guards it, and what he does when he's scared. That was the job. The other part of the job was the part people think the job is, and the schools they sent me to for that part were very good, and what they were mostly teaching was how a person comes apart, in what order, and how to do it so that it takes a long time and hurts the entire way. He stepped on the cigarette, just once, with his boot, and put it out. That's what I was doing while you were learning the recording statutes. And Reuben Sabinal stepped back. Half a step. He would deny it later, to his sister, twice. Then Sabinal's face reassembled itself and he smiled and he said, "Tonight," and he got in the truck, and Nico Almanza looked at Jubal for a second longer than he should have, and they left. And here's the part where I lose people. Because Jubal Kearsey went inside, and he packed a bag, and at 11 o'clock that night he drove out of Vado Seco on the highway going north, past the cafe and the shuttered Ford dealership and the water tower, and about 9 people saw him do it, and by Saturday the whole county knew that the well driller had been run out. Odalie found out at school. A boy named Truman said it in the lunch line, laughing, and she went to the bathroom and stayed there for the rest of 4th period. Camila cried in her car in the HEB parking lot in Alpine for reasons she could not have explained to anybody, including herself. Reuben Sabinal, that night, at his own dinner table, said the thing that a certain kind of man always says. He said, "You see, all of them. Every single one. You just have to know what they love." And 240 miles away, in a motel in Fort Stockton that took cash, Jubal Kearsey laid 15 green logbooks out on a bedspread and started reading. Here's what he had, and I want to lay it out the way he laid it out, because the whole thing turns on it. 406 holes. That was the number in the books, 15 years of them. Of those, 61 were plugged and abandoned, and 38 more were capped but not formally plugged, meaning there was still an open steel pipe going down into the dark with a bolted lid on it. Every one had coordinates to 5 decimals. Every one had a total depth, a casing depth, a static water level, and a hand-drawn wellhead sketch with 2 fixed reference distances. And every one of them had a driller's report filed with the state, date-stamped, sitting in a public database, some of them 14 years old. That last part is the thing. Hold on to it. Because everything Reuben Sabinal had built rested on the idea that he was the one who controlled what was written down and when. Jubal took a county parcel map, the ownership map, the one that's public and that any person can pull off the appraisal district website for free, and he pulled every parcel that had transferred to any entity with a Sabinal land and title escrow number in the last 4 years. There were 23. He drew them on the map in pencil, and what he got was not a scatter. It was a snake. 40 miles of continuous private ground from a low crossing on the river called Paso Prieto up to the county road at the De La Cruz section. Then he laid his 406 holes over it. 14 of his abandoned wells fell inside that corridor. 14 out of 99 dead holes spread across 1,900 square miles. That's not distribution, that's selection. And when he ranked those 14 by what a person might want in a hole, cased steel, dry, 60 feet or deeper, road accessible in a truck, out of sight of any dwelling, all 14 scored at the top of the list, and the 85 other dead holes in the county did not. He went back 4 days later, at night, in a truck he'd borrowed from a cousin of a cousin in Marathon, and he did 1 hole and 1 hole only, the De La Cruz. He didn't cut the lock. He walked in, 2.5 miles, in the dark, with a pack. He photographed the cap and the bolts before he touched them. He backed out the 6 bolts and set them on a rag in the order he removed them. And then he lowered a $100 borescope on a marked line down the casing. And at 41 feet, the camera found a welded eye bolt that had absolutely no business being in a water well. And hanging off it on stainless aircraft cable was a sealed canvas duffel about the size of a body. He did not touch it. He did not open it. He did not cut it down. That's the discipline. And that's the entire reason this story ends the way it ends instead of ending with a driller in a Texas prison. He photographed it with the depth counter in frame. He pulled the borescope. He put the 6 bolts back in the exact same holes and torqued them in a star pattern. And then, because he thought about it for a full minute, he backed 2 of them off a quarter turn and scarred the paint on the heads with a punch, so it looked exactly like it had before he arrived. Then he walked 2.5 miles back out and drove to Fort Stockton and wrote it all down in a green book. Date, time, coordinates, depth to the hook, the make of the cable clamp. 14 holes. He now knew what was in one of them. And more importantly, he knew something that Ruben Sabinal had never once considered, because Ruben Sabinal thought about the world entirely from the top down, in instruments and filings and county clerks. Every one of those 14 vaults had been dug by a man who had written down its exact depth, its exact position, and its exact geometry, and filed a public record of it years before Ruben Sabinal ever crossed the river. The holes had a provenance, and it wasn't his. Jubal tried the right way first. I want that on the record, because people always assume men like this skip that step, and he didn't. He went to Sheriff Roque Zamora, at Zamora's house, at 5 a.m, and sat at his kitchen table with photographs and a parcel map. Zamora was 55 and honest, and he had 3 deputies, 2 working vehicles, 1,900 square miles, and a county commissioner's court that had cut his budget 4 years running, and he looked at what Jubal put in front of him for a long time, and then he said the truest and most useless sentence in the story. Jubal, if I roll out there with what I've got, I get 1 hole open, and the other 13 are empty by Thursday, and one of my kids gets shot at a stop on the river road 2 weeks later. I can't do this. I can hand it up. So he handed it up, and 11 days later, Jubal Kearsey was sitting across from a Homeland Security Investigations agent out of El Paso named Wynn Hartline in a Denny's in Van Horn, and it went badly. Understand her position. A 39-year-old federal agent with a caseload is presented with a man in a custody dispute whose ex-wife has just married the target, who has been publicly run out of town, who was in the military and won't say what he did, and who is claiming that a licensed title company is running a $200 million corridor and that he personally knows the coordinates of 14 vaults because he dug them. You understand what this reads like, Hartline said. Yes. It reads like a man who lost his kid at a hearing. It does, Jubal said. So don't take my word. Pull the state well database. Anybody can. Filter by my license number. Cordero County, 2009 through 2013. It's public. Then pull the appraisal district ownership rolls, which are also public. Then put one on top of the other. I'm not asking you to believe me. I'm asking you to do arithmetic with 2 public documents. She said she'd look. She meant it in the way people mean it when they're being polite. She had a fentanyl case in Presidio and a human smuggling case in Sierra Blanca and a supervisor who measured her in seizures. Meanwhile, Ruben Sabinal did what Ruben Sabinal did, which was file. On the 19th of May, an emergency motion was filed in the 394th District Court, asking for modification of the custody arrangement on the grounds that the father had abandoned the state, had a documented history of unspecified violence, was suffering from untreated post-traumatic stress, and had been observed on private property at night in an agitated condition. Attached was a sworn affidavit from Camila Sabinal. She wrote that her ex-husband had spent 20 years in a role he refused to disclose to his own family. She wrote that he had, and this is close to a quote, described in detail to her new husband the methods by which a human being can be dismantled. She wrote that she was afraid, and that her daughter was afraid. 2 of those things were technically true, and all of it was a knife. The judge granted the temporary order in 11 minutes, unopposed, because Jubal was 200 miles away and hadn't been served properly, and didn't know it was happening. His custody went to supervised, 1 Saturday a month, at a facility in Alpine. 3 nights after the order, somebody came onto the Kearsey yard at 2 a.m. and burned the support truck and put a chain through the mud pump and dragged it into the arroyo behind the building and cut every hydraulic line on the rig. Jubal was there. He was sitting in the dark of the metal building because he had come back that night to get the rest of the logbooks, and he watched a 29-year-old named Nico Almanza pour diesel on his truck from about 40 feet away. He had a clear opportunity, in every sense of that phrase, and he sat still, and he let it happen, and he watched, and he noted that Almanza threw up afterward behind the fence, and he wrote that in the book too. Because by then he'd understood the shape of the thing. Ruben Sabinal owned every arena Jubal might choose. He owned the courthouse, he owned the clerk, he owned the paper, he owned the sheriff's budget by starving it, he owned the town's opinion, and he had money that made time itself a resource he could spend. There was exactly one arena Sabinal did not own, could not buy, and did not even know existed as a place where a fight could happen. Underneath, the plan he built over the next 5 weeks had 4 legs, and he built them in an order, and the order is the smartest thing in the whole story. The first leg was the girl, and it came first because everything else was hostage to it. He drove to Odessa and had breakfast with a man named Moss Kimball, 52, who had been in the same rooms as Jubal for 9 of those 20 years, and who now owned 11 hotshot trucks and a heavy recovery outfit and a dispatch office with a bad coffee maker. Jubal did not ask him for men and did not ask him for guns. He asked him for a schedule, a trailer with a sleeper, and a route from a specific mile marker on Highway 90 to a specific town in Colorado that did not pass a single fixed camera. And he asked for one thing more, a single text, from a phone Moss would carry, sent at a moment Jubal would name, containing nothing at all. One buzz. That was the whole message. It meant she's out. The second leg was provenance, and this is the part I want you to actually take with you. Jubal did not need to prove what was in the holes. Federal agents with a warrant are extremely good at proving what's in a hole. What he needed to prove was that the holes were older than Ruben Sabinal, because the entire defense strategy of a man like that, and it is a good one, it has worked many times, is to say that a bitter driller with a grudge and a truck put those bags there himself. So he went to Austin, not to a task force, to a public records terminal at the Texas Water Development Board, where he paid $11.40 and pulled certified copies of 212 drillers' reports filed under his license, with the state's own date stamps, going back to 2009. Then he went to the Cordero County Appraisal District and paid for certified ownership histories on 23 parcels. Then he drove to a hydrogeologist at Sul Ross named Dr. Sonova Gaddis and paid her $400 to write a 2-page letter stating, as a professional opinion, that the 14 wells in question were in the Rustler Formation at depths where no potable water existed in that portion of the county, and that no rational person would drill or maintain them for water. Nothing he assembled was secret. Every piece of it could have been assembled by anybody, for under $600, in 9 days. That's what makes it beautiful. Ruben Sabinal had spent 4 years and millions building a structure whose one fatal flaw was that its foundation was public. The third leg was the seam. Every organization has one person who is in it because of a decision they regret. In Sabinal Land and Title, that person was an escrow officer named Perla Salazar, 34, who had a notary commission, a signature on 400 documents, and a nephew named Andres, who was 19, and who had been driving for Ruben's people since he was 17 because Perla's sister could not stop it, and Perla had not tried hard enough. Jubal did not threaten her, and he did not offer her money, because both of those things create a witness who can be impeached. He sat down across from her at a taqueria in Marfa and put one piece of paper in front of her, a certified copy of a warranty deed for a section of the Dela Cruz place, notarized by her, on a date when, according to a hospital wristband photo her own sister had posted online, Perla Salazar had been in a delivery room in Odessa. "That's a felony with your name on it," he said. "You didn't do it. Somebody used your seal. And the reason I'm showing it to you instead of giving it to a grand jury is that in about 90 days, everybody in that office is going to be indicted, and the only ones who don't go to prison are the ones who were already talking." Then he ordered food and let her sit with it for 20 minutes, and she cried, and then she asked what happens to Andres, and Jubal said the truest thing available. That depends entirely on which side of the door he's standing on when it opens, and you're the only person who can move him. The fourth leg was Nico Almanza, and Jubal ran it completely differently, because Nico was not a seam, He was a wound. He waited for him outside a wash on the Bolson highway at 11 at night and got into the passenger seat of his truck while Nico was inside paying. And when Nico came back and saw a man sitting in his cab, he went very still. Jubal handed him a photocopy. It was a driller's report from 2010 for a well on 160 acres near Paso Prieto, landowner listed as Almanza, and attached to it was a certified deed history showing that in 2021, that same acreage had transferred to Rio Bolson Land Holdings for $8,000 on a water rights severance that any competent lawyer would call fraud. "That's your grandmother's," Jubal said. "That's how it went. He didn't tell you that part." Nico Almanza sat in a parked truck in the dark with a piece of paper and did not say anything for a very long time. And then he said, "I burned your truck." "I know," Jubal said. "I was inside the building. You threw up afterward. That's why we're talking instead of something else." The pieces started moving in June. Perla Salazar did not steal files, because stolen files are poison in a courtroom. She did something far more useful. She told Special Agent Wynn Hartline, in a proffer, exactly which drawer, which server, and which notary book to name in an affidavit. And she did it after Hartline had already, on a slow Tuesday, finally run the arithmetic Jubal had asked for and had sat looking at her screen for 11 minutes with two public databases open, one on top of the other, showing 14 wells inside a snake. Hartline called Jubal at 4 in the morning. She didn't apologize. What she said was, "How many of the 99 dead holes in that county are inside his corridor?" 14. "And how many would you expect by chance?" 2, Jubal said. "Maybe 3. There was a silence on the line, and then Hartline said, "I'm going to need every logbook you have. It costs, though. It always costs. And I'm not going to skip this part." On the 22nd of June, a deputy named Fen Quilliam, 26 years old, 8 months on the job, made a traffic stop on the River Road at 1:40 in the morning, on 2 trucks running together with no lights. He was alone because there was nobody else to be. He got out and walked up on the second truck, and he was shot 4 times and left on the caliche, and his unit ran with the door open until the battery died at 9 the next morning. That was the day it stopped being a paper case for everybody involved. That was also the day Aurelio Casarin, 60 years old, sitting in a house in Ciudad Bolson, sent an accountant across the river to audit Ruben Sabinal, because a dead American deputy on a county road is the single most expensive thing that can happen to a corridor. And it happened because 2 of Ruben's trucks were running a schedule that a 12-year-old had noticed 2 years earlier. Ruben Sabinal now had a problem with his own people, and the way men like him respond to pressure from above is to demonstrate control below. He needed to show that the loose thread in his county was tied off. So he set a date. He told his sister Isabel to get the well driller's home place under contract, and he told her to make it fast. And he told her that if the man wouldn't sell, the daughter would be at the house on the hill full-time by the end of the month, and that the driller would sign anything after that. Which is exactly what Jubal had been waiting 11 weeks for him to say. Because the last piece, the one Jubal needed and could not manufacture, was Ruben Sabinal's actual, personal, legal name on a recorded instrument. In 4 years, through 23 parcels and 11 entities, Ruben Sabinal had never once put his own name on the county records. Not once. Every deed ran to a shell. That was the wall between him and everything. Federal forfeiture is a beautiful and terrifying machine, but it eats property. And it eats it by ownership, and you cannot take a man's liberty for what a Delaware LLC owns unless you can pierce it, and piercing takes years. Unless he signs personally. Unless he wants something so badly, and so publicly, that he takes title himself. The Kearsey home place is 410 acres on the northeast corner of the De La Cruz section, and it is the only piece of the 40-mile corridor Ruben Sabinal did not own. His snake had a gap in it, and the gap was a driller's grandfather's ranch, and it had irritated him for 4 years. It had one improvement of any value, a well, 1,140 feet, cased, drilled by Jubal's grandfather in 1974, and deepened by Jubal in 2011, and it was the only reliable water in 11 miles. On the 8th of July, Jubal Kearsey called Sabinal Land and Title and said he was ready to sell, and that he wanted to close in person, and that he had one condition. The buyer had to be a person, not a company, because he had been burned by a corporation in the divorce, and he was not doing that again. Isabel Sabinal told him that was unusual. Jubal said, in a tired voice that he practiced, that he was a tired man who wanted to be gone, and that if that was a problem he'd sell to the Tarletons instead. She called him back in 90 minutes and said her brother would sign personally. The closing was on the 16th of July at 10 in the morning, in a conference room in a strip mall next to a nail salon, and it took 19 minutes. Reuben Sabinal wore a gray suit and was in an expansive mood. He shook Jubal's hand and held it a second too long. He talked about how there was no shame in a man knowing when a thing was finished. He talked about his wife's cooking. At one point he said, "And I promise you this is real. I want you to know that Odalie is well cared for. She has everything." Jubal said, "That's good." The consideration was $390,000, which was over market and which Reuben insisted on, because a man who is being watched by his own organization wants a clean, generous, unimpeachable transaction on the record. Perla Salazar notarized it. Her hands were steady, which she was proud of for the rest of her life. And Ozias Varnado, the Cordero County clerk and recorder, 61 years old, who had been on Sabinal's payroll for 4 years at $3,000 a month, personally walked the instrument across the street and recorded it at 11:04 that morning, volume 811, page 233, because Reuben wanted it done same day. Here is what Reuben Sabinal had just done, and he had no idea, and neither did his sister, and neither did the lawyer who reviewed it in 11 minutes. He had taken personal, recorded, fee-simple title to 410 acres, and the meets and bounds description on that deed, the legal description, the one that governs, the one nobody ever reads because it's a page and a half of bearings and distances, did not stop at the fence line the parties had walked. It ran along a survey call from a monument at the northeast corner down a bearing that swept in a 200-foot wide strip of the adjoining section that had been part of the Kearsey grant since 1911, and that everyone in that county, including the appraisal district, had informally treated as Dela Cruz ground for 50 years. Inside that strip were 3 of the 14 wells. Jubal had not forged anything. He had not altered a survey. He had done something much worse. He had gone to Austin and pulled the original 1911 patent and the 1948 resurvey and hired a licensed surveyor out of Fort Stockton to write the legal description correctly, for the first time in 70 years, and had handed it to a buyer's lawyer who had 11 minutes and a boss in a hurry. Reuben Sabinal now personally owned 3 vaults, recorded, notarized, same day, in his own name. The other 11 were held by entities whose sole member, per articles Perla Salazar had filed and could authenticate, was Reuben Sabinal. And every one of the 14 sat in a hole with a state-filed driller's report dated between 2009 and 2013. That afternoon, Jubal deposited the check, drove to Alpine, and spent the last hour of his supervised visitation with his daughter at a plastic table, and he told her the number. 406, he said. That's how many holes I've put in this county. You know why I write everyone down? Odalie shrugged. Because a thing you wrote down is worth more than a thing you remember. Anybody can remember. Only one person wrote it down. He looked at her. You've got 1,100 marks on a piece of butcher paper. Same job. You're better at it than I was at 12. She said, "Are you leaving again?" He said, "No." She was already gone, and it was her mother who moved her. Camila Sabinal broke on the 6th of July, in a hallway, over a word. She had gone looking for her husband's reading glasses and found him on the phone in the study with his back to the door, and she heard him say her daughter's name, and then she heard him say, in the reasonable voice he used for logistics, that the girl stays until the driller signs, because you don't sell the property before the closing. That was all, 9 words, and a woman who had spent 14 months being extremely good at not knowing things stopped being good at it, standing in a hallway holding a pair of glasses. She did not confront him. Whatever else you want to say about Camila, and there is plenty, she did not do the stupid brave thing. She waited 9 days. She called Perla Salazar, who she had known since the school district, and Perla gave her a phone number, and on the 14th of July, she sat in a federal building in El Paso and told Wynn Hartline, that the affidavit she had signed on the 19th of May was false, that she had written it because her husband had drafted it, and that she understood what she was admitting. Heartline told her exactly what that meant for her. Aggravated perjury is a felony in Texas. Camila said she knew. On the 15th of July at 4:20 in the morning, at a mile marker on Highway 90 west of Marfa, Camila put her daughter into the sleeper of a hotshot truck driven by a 52-year-old man named Moss Kimball, and Odalie looked back at her through the glass, and by 4 the next afternoon, she was in a house in Colorado with a great-aunt named Verna, who had a dog and a piano. Jubal signed the deed 31 hours after his daughter crossed into New Mexico. Ruben Sabinal figured it out at 9:40 that night. It wasn't Jubal who told him, it was the accountant Kasserine had sent, who did what accountants do, which is read every page, and who came into the study on the hill with a printout of the day's recordings and asked, politely, why the patron's own name was on a public instrument in Cordero County for the first time in 4 years, and whether the patron was aware that the legal description on that instrument covered a strip of the De La Cruz section. There is a particular silence that happens when a very intelligent man realizes he has been slow, and everybody in that room heard it. Ruben Sabinal did not call his lawyer. He should have. What he did was get in a truck with Nico Almanza and 2 men from Paso Prieto and drive out to 410 acres he had owned for 11 hours, because his wife's daughter was going to be sitting in his house by midnight, and the driller was going to sign a correction deed at gunpoint if that's what it took. The old Kearsey place sits at the end of 2 miles of Caliche with a barn, a house nobody had lived in since 2016, and a windmill. Jubal Kearsey was there, in the dark, and he had a rig running. Not the drilling rig, the rig his grandfather bought in 1962, a cable tool sputter that hadn't turned a bit since the Carter administration, and he wasn't drilling with it. He was using its sand line, because a sand line is a winch with 600 feet of cable and a lot of very old torque, and 40 feet from the barn there is a hole in the ground that his grandfather bored in 1949 with a bucket rig, 36 inches in diameter and 62 feet deep, dry since the year Jubal was born, cased in corrugated pipe and covered by a sheet of plate steel and a stack of pallets. The headlights came up the Caliche and stopped, and 4 doors opened. Ruben Sabinal walked into the work light with his jacket open, and he was past charm now. And the first thing he said was that Jubal had 11 seconds to explain a survey call. Jubal was standing at the wellhead with a wrench in his hand. He said, "It's the 1911 patent. Your lawyer had 11 minutes." Sabinal told him what was going to happen. He said the girl would be in his house tonight. He said Camila would sign whatever he put in front of her. He said, again, because men like this only ever have one idea. She's my property. That's what you never understood. And Jubal's phone buzzed. Once. In his shirt pocket, against his chest, 1 short pulse, and then nothing. He took it out and looked at it and put it back. "You want to know what that was?" he said. "No." A magistrate in Pecos signed 14 search warrants 9 minutes ago. De La Cruz, Paso Prieto, the Tarleton Corner, all of them. They're serving at first light, and every hole they open has a state-filed driller's report on it from 2009 with my license number and a date stamp 4 years before you crossed the river. He set the wrench down on the plate steel. So nobody's going to believe I put anything in them. And the 3 on this section are recorded in your name, personally. Volume 811, page 233. Your clerk walked it over himself. He was very quick about it. Ruben Sabinal stood in the work light and did the arithmetic, and you could watch him do it. And then he reached into his jacket for the gun. 2 things happened, and neither of them was the thing he expected. The first is that the 2 men from Paso Prieto did not move. Their name was Almanza. Their grandmother's 160 acres had gone to Rio Bolson Land Holdings for $8,000 on a severance that a certified deed history, sitting folded in the glove box of the truck they'd just arrived in, described in language a 5th grader could follow. They had been reading it for 9 days. The second is that Nico Almanza said, quietly, in Spanish, "No." And Ruben Sabinal, 47 years old, holding a pistol in a jacket he had not gotten his hand all the way into, turned his head to look at the men behind him, which is the single worst thing you can do, and it took Jubal Kearsey about a second and a half. I'm not going to make a meal of that part. It was a wrist, and then a knee, and then a shoulder. And the pistol went into the dirt, and it was over so fast that one of the Almanza cousins later said it looked like Sabinal had tripped. Then Jubal did the thing. He put a rope sling under the man's arms, and he ran the sand line off the sputter, and he lifted a screaming attorney from Monterey 4 feet off the ground and swung him over a 36-inch hole and lowered him, on his grandfather's winch, 62 feet into the dark. Then he threw down a flashlight and Sabinal's own phone. And he sat on the plate steel at the edge with his boots in the dirt, and he talked down the pipe. You've got service. 1 bar. It works down there, I checked. There's no water. It's dry. It's been dry since 1974, and it's 62 feet. So you're not hurt and you're not going anywhere. Federal agents will be here about 6:30. The sound that came back up a 62-foot corrugated pipe is not a sound I can describe, and Jubal didn't try. Property, Jubal said. You used that word twice. So, here's the thing about property, and you'd know it better than me, because it's your whole trade. Property isn't what you hold, it's what's written down. And this hole is on a parcel that is recorded in your name, in your own hand, notarized, 410 acres, volume 811, page 233. He leaned over the pipe. You own this. Congratulations. It's the only thing in this county that's actually yours. Ruben Sabinal called Aurelio Casarin at 11:52 that night from the bottom of a dry well. He got 11 seconds. The accountant had already reported. A man whose real name is on a public instrument covering 3 cash sites is not an asset. He is a subpoena with legs, and the plaza had known that since 10:15. The line went dead, and Ruben Sabinal understood, 62 feet down in the dark, holding a phone with 1 bar, that the deed he had been so pleased to sign that morning had not bought him a ranch. It had bought him a name on a piece of paper in a county courthouse, and everything he was worth had just become evidence. And the only people on earth who could have taken him out of that hole had just decided that he should stay in it. He was still down there at 6:34 in the morning when Wynn Hartline came up the caliche with 14 teams behind her. What they took out of the ground over the following 9 days is a matter of public record now. 14 wells. 11 of them loaded. 206 kilograms of product and, in the Dela Cruz hole and the one on the Tarleton corner, 4 canvas duffels of United States currency that took a forfeiture unit 2 days to count and that finally came to $18,140,000. Every single hole had a driller's report on file with the state of Texas, with a date stamp, with a total depth that matched what the teams measured to within 11 inches, and with a hand-drawn wellhead sketch in a green logbook that showed distances to 2 fixed objects that were still exactly where a man had written them down. No defense attorney in the world could argue those holes were dug for the occasion. That was the entire point. That had always been the entire point. Ruben Sabinal was charged federally with continuing criminal enterprise, money laundering, and conspiracy. And because 3 of the cash sites sat on land he personally and publicly owned, the government did not have to spend 4 years piercing 11 shells. They took it all in 14 months. 23 parcels, the house on the hill, the title company, and a wall. He is serving life without parole at a federal facility in Colorado, and he is not protected there, because the plaza he worked for spent 1.5 years explaining to everyone who would listen that the man had put his own name on their ground. Isabel Sabinal was disbarred and got 9 years. Ozias Varnado, the county clerk, 61 years old, $3,000 a month, got 4 years and cried at his sentencing about a boat. Nico Almanza took a cooperation deal, testified for 2 days, served 18 months, and now runs a 2-truck water hauling outfit out of Vado Seco. Jubal sold him the first truck at a price both of them lied about. Perla Salazar received a portion of the forfeiture, moved to San Antonio, and got her nephew Andres a job in a machine shop, and he is 23 now and has never been arrested. Camila pleaded to aggravated perjury and served 11 months. She lost custody permanently, which is what happens, and she did not contest it, which is the one thing in her whole file I'd point to if somebody asked me to find something. She sees her daughter now on terms a court set, and Jubal did not fight, and by every account she is trying, and it is going slowly, and that's the truth of it. Sheriff Roque Zamora used the equitable share from that forfeiture to put 4 more deputies on the road, and the substation on the River Road is named for Fen Quilliam, who was 26. And on a Tuesday in March of the following year, on the courthouse steps in Vado Seco, at a federal forfeiture auction, a well driller in his 4th best shirt stood in a crowd of 11 people and bought 410 acres and a house nobody had lived in since 2016 for $18,000 because nobody wants dry ground in Cordero County. He had sold it for $390,000 7 months earlier to the man who was about to become its previous owner. Odalie came home in April. She's 14 now. The butcher paper is bigger. It takes up 2 walls. And there's a new symbol in the key in the bottom corner, a small circle with an X through it. And there are 99 of them on the map. And she'll tell you what they are if you ask. Here's what I keep coming back to on this one, and it isn't the whole. Everybody wants to call that revenge. I don't think it was, and I don't think justice is the right word either, because justice is something a system does, and this wasn't the system. The system granted a custody modification in 11 minutes. What Jubal Kearsey actually did has a duller name, and the duller name is the lesson. It was bookkeeping. Ruben Sabinal was a man who believed he controlled the record. That was his entire genius and his entire religion. He owned the clerk, he wrote the affidavits, he chose what got filed and when, and he had beaten every opponent he'd ever had by simply being the only person in the fight who understood that the fight was about paper. And he lost to a well driller with a shelf of green notebooks. For one reason, the driller had been writing things down for 15 years before there was anything to win, about a subject nobody thought was worth recording, in a place nobody thought to look. That's not luck. That's the only real defense there is against a man with more money than you. You cannot outspend him, and you cannot outlawyer him. You can outrecord him, because his records start when he starts caring about you, and yours started years ago. So here's the thing I'd actually ask you to do, and it's boring, which is how you'll know it's real. Pick the thing in your life that you know better than anybody else. Your street, your building, your route, your kid's schedule, the machine you run at work, the ground under your feet, and this week, write down 1 page about it. Dated, specific, distances, times, numbers, names, then put a copy somewhere that isn't your house. You will almost certainly never need it. 99% of you never will. But if you ever do need it, you will need it the way a man in a dry county needed a green notebook from 2009, and there will be no way on earth to go back and make it. He wrote down 406 holes when they were only holes. That's the whole story. Everything else is just what happens when a man like that finally gets a reason. I'm Nathan. Go put something on paper.